President Trump has been railing against the New York Times since the 2016 campaign, claiming they were dishonest and biased against him. It turns out he was right, according to its former executive editor, Jill Abramson. She says the paper's news pages, the home of its straight news coverage, have become, quote, unmistakably anti-Trump, end quote. Here now is Howard Kurtz, Fox News media analyst and host of MediaBuzz here on the Fox News channel. And Howie, thanks so much for going. You were the one that broke this story and found what she'd been saying. But this is it. I mean, we've heard this before, but we haven't really seen it to this degree.
Well, we haven't heard it from the former editor of the New York Times. The story's gone absolutely viral since I broke it in my Fox column. It's trending on Twitter. That's a big deal. And Jill Abramson is in a forthcoming book called Merchants of Truth, and she says the news pages, not the op-ed land, the news pages, anti-Trump, raw opinion in some stories and headlines, and that this rings the cash registers. Here's another quote. Given its mostly liberal audience, there was an implicit financial reward for the Times in running lots of Trump stories, almost all of them negative. They drove big traffic numbers, more than 500,000 digital subscriptions in just the first few months with Trump moving into the White House.
Yeah, so they were rewarded with circulation, but at what point did they get off the rails and decide that, hey, we have got to go out there and make sure we give our audience what they want rather than playing it straight and delivering the news? Why isn't that their mantra?
Well, that should be the mantra of every news organization, but I think a lot of organizations like the Times are finding that there is a financial reward in almost a business model in playing to an anti-Trump audience. Now, in this case, yes, Jill Abramson was fired 4 years ago. She writes about this in the book. I write about it in the column. She admits that she had flaws. She could be self-righteous. She was a flawed manager. And she's criticizing her successor, Dean Baquet, the current executive editor, who was her number two, who did play a role in her firing. But it doesn't read to me like sour grapes. She praises him at times. It reads to me like somebody who loves the New York Times, who, by the way, is not a fan of President Trump. She's criticized him in her own columns, but she believes that the paper that she loved has just gone off the rails when it comes to this president. Now,
is there a change in the journalistic standards of the young people? I want to put up this quote here that she says, the more woke staff thought that urgent times called for urgent measures. The dangers of Trump's presidency, it obviated the old standards. Yeah. So I mean, they think they're self-righteous and justified in doing this because there's a greater good.
And I have heard so many journalists say this, some publicly, some privately, that Donald Trump, his presidency is so out of control, he's so unfit for the job, and all of that, that it justifies what we're doing. That in effect we become what Steve Bannon once called the opposition party, that we have to crusade against him. And in Abramson's telling about the Times, she says it's the younger staff, the more woke staff, that feels like that all that standards that we use for every other president, throw them out the window because this is Donald Trump. And then she says the more anti-Trump the Times was perceived to be, the more it was mistrusted for being biased. And that's the cost. You make lots of money in the short term. But if you lose that credibility, that you're just applying a whole different set of standards to a president who you don't like personally, viscerally, ideologically, I think your credibility gradually erodes with the larger audience.
And even the relationship that she had with Hillary Clinton, I mean, because it wasn't all pro-Hillary Clinton. I mean, the New York Times did break the story about the
private email server,
and that caused some distrust. And she seemed, at least from what I read in your article, to say, well, that was a problem for her.
Well, she says that she's never gotten along with Hillary. She says Hillary could be paranoid. She also thinks the Times overplayed the Hillary story. That's been the subject of a lot of debate since 2016. But the point is, this is not me saying it, you saying it, President Trump saying it. This is the former editor of the paper, former Washington bureau chief, former Wall Street Journal reporter, putting her thoughts into this book and essentially saying, that the worst critics of the Times are true when it comes to the Trump coverage. And I think journalists at all organizations have to worry at this point. And not that there shouldn't be aggressive reporting, not that there aren't some good reporters at the Times, not that some of the investigations missed the mark, but the cumulative tone and volume and relentless nature of the anti-Trump fusillade I think is really hurting credibility. And now we have Jill Abramson.
No, look, you go to foxnews.com. You can find this article that you put out there. It is a fascinating read.
Thank you.
And I do think it's more problematic than just the New York Times. And I wonder where these schools of journalism are and what they're teaching these kids, because I don't get the sense of we're going to report the news, not try to create the news to push our own political narrative. So thank you, Howie.
Somehow that's now seen as old-fashioned. Thank you.
Exactly. Appreciate it.